that frame rater.
For many years, the PlayStation Portable, or PSP, was an active scene for homebrew development. It has had its slow years, but even today you'll have no difficulty finding communities still working on it. We'll start off by taking a look at dedicated homebrew ports alphabetically. For this segment, I'll be judging them based on a satisfactory scale, meant to indicate how good they are in comparison with their original source content. Cave Story, a cult classic 2D adventure platformer that plays excellently on PSP. You'd be hard-pressed to find any reason not to play through the game here. Commander Keen, another classic 2D adventure platformer. This DOS game port has been optimized with a PSP with an incredibly smooth frame rate and solid controls. D3DV98 Duke Nukem 3D. The famous 90s shooter returns to the PSP with confusing controls. Thankfully, the port has the game's soundtrack playing correctly, which I can't say for other ports of Duke 3D to the PSP. Actually, this port does most everything better than the rest of them, especially the frame rate. It's playable, but it still feels quite rough, and it is a bit dark if I'm being honest. Duke Nukem 3D. This one doesn't have a special title to my knowledge. Yeah, this is definitely the type of music I associate with Duke Nukem. The game's music is missing, the audio is high-pitched, and the frame rate is all over the place. Probably the worst factor is the brightness. Honestly, most of the time, I can't see a damn thing. Insomnia, Quake. One of the most revolutionary FPS that still holds its influence and in some cases even programming in modern shooters of today. This port does it justice with extreme accuracy to its PC approach. The frame rate does dip occasionally, but it's not too noticeable. JK Duke 3D, Duke Nukem 3D. Here's one you'll need the E-loader for, as it won't work on modern firmware. I'd say this has the best controls of the Duke 3D PSP ports, but like with the last, there's no music, the sound effects are high-pitched, and the frame rate is poor. At least I will admit the frame rate remains consistent here, which kinda gives it an advantage. It seemed stabilized at 15 frames. Not good, but this stability does help it to feel a bit more playable. It's kinda hard to judge this one. PSP Kobo. This port feels remarkably similar to the original, even if the graphics have been simplified. Unfortunately, there's no sound, which is quite a bummer, but at least the familiar gameplay is here. Kobo Deluxe. Unfortunately, this port seems to have control issues. On top of that, it also has no sound. Often I found my ship won't properly react to my inputs, or they'd go completely unnoticed. It looks better than the last with the same graphics as on the PC, even the more modern editions that Deluxe brings. But if the gameplay suffers so much as to make it feel kinda unplayable, I just can't recommend it. OpenTTD, Transport Tycoon Deluxe. I'm shocked at how well this plays. It feels very akin to the original PC game, although for some reason the zooming and camera panning seems broken. To move the camera, I have to actually zoom out and then back into another location. I'm not overly familiar with the original, but I feel like I never had to deal with it like this. Still, the game remains perfectly playable, if a bit inconvenient at times. Quake II by Crowbar. Despite the fact that the single-player demo initiates on startup, I couldn't get single-player to work. I mean, I loaded a single-player map in Deathmatch. Does that count? Also, this has some of the longest loading times I've ever witnessed, that even put the Xbox 360 port on a pedestal. But yeah, loading anything single-player just crashed the game on me. This is by all means impressive, it's just multiplayer, I think. I don't have a clue on how to set up actual multiplayer on this thing either, because other than the officially released PSP games, I could never get any of this multiplayer stuff to work on Homebrew. Is there some kind of extra requirement here? Quake III by Crowbar. You know, I guess this is the single player, but it's funny because Quake III is technically just multiplayer. You can fight against bots in what is the single player campaign, but after the first two stages, the frame rate makes the game virtually unplayable. It took me a while to get there some years ago when I played this on the PSP, so naturally I didn't play it for as long this time. But trust me, you aren't going to be enjoying the entire game here. Rise of the Triad.
No! Please! No, don't shoot!
If you want to play it through on the PSP, I'd say this isn't a bad choice per se. It seems to run just fine, but it did however crash on me once and I didn't play it for too long, so... PSP Strife. This is the first time I've ever played Strife. It's a game in the Doom engine that plays more like an RPG, I think. I'm not too sure. Doesn't seem like my type of thing, but it plays really well on the PSP for all it's worth. SuperTux 1.3. You'll notice the music plays before the game does. Shortly into the jingle, you'll see the title screen. For some reason, you can't skip the intro, unlike the original. I played quite a bit of this port back when it came out as a fan of the SuperTux games. On first impression, it seems great, but towards the latter half of the game, it pretty much locks up and refuses to continue. I'm not sure why, since the first half plays great. It seems to be some kind of memory issue. It's a port worth trying, but not for a full playthrough, unfortunately. Tile World, Chips Challenge. This is a port of the Chips Challenge port to modern Windows operating systems. It reads all the original level packs of Chips Challenge, so you can play through the entirety of the original game. The framerate by all means renders it playable, but it does feel kinda weird ranging around 20 FPS for this sort of thing. Keep in mind you'll need eLoader again for this one, as it won't work traditionally on modern firmware. Tyrian, a port of the classic epic mega games DOS shmup. Isn't much for me to say here, it runs perfectly. Wolf 3D, Wolfenstein 3D. Well, the game runs perfectly itself. Sound is good, solid 60 frames. I think the music is playing a bit slower than usual, but whatever. Strafe turning looks pretty jank. For some reason the secret here was left open despite I hadn't interacted with it. Not sure what was up with that. This is honestly a good port of the game to the PSP, and I would give it a high score. However, there's another Wolfenstein port that puts this one to shame, quite frankly. Wolfenstein 3D ported by Zack. Look at this presentation! The music is accurate, the secrets aren't exposed, but strafe turning still looks jank. Was that an issue with the original game? I don't remember that being a thing. Nonetheless, this is basically everything you'd want from a port of the game. Well, those are all the one-to-one ports I found for the PSP which interested me. Now it's time for faithful ports. Ports that are more or less just remakes, sometimes with a different overall identity. Definitely not always the case, but for each of these there should be at least one thing you'll notice that isn't to scale with the original presentation of the game. Additionally, none of these are source ports. At the most, they're recreated from the ground up. Cat Mario. That Rage game that was all the rage in the late 2000s. The gameplay seems to be identical to the original, but now in the background you hear Cheetah Men music. I don't really recommend playing this game for more than a few minutes for your own sanity, but still, the game accomplished its goal in replicating the original experience. Chips Challenge Point 1. A highly respectable attempt at bringing the original Windows 3.1 game to the PSP, unfortunately with no sound. Also, it only contains the first couple of levels from the game. At least it does appear that way since level 5 is incompletable. Basically, you're only getting 3 minutes of gameplay here. Even though it's essentially perfect, it really is just a proof of concept. Deadly Garden, Plants vs. Zombies. This is an endless horde in a single field, meaning no, there are no levels here. You get your selection of plants to fend off the zombies and just keep going until the frame rate tanks so hard that you give up. Die-hard fans of the original might get a kick out of this, but generally the entertainment value here is short-lived. Digger. As far as I know, this is Digger remade in Flash? The title screen implies that anyhow. This is a highly accurate remake of Digger that feels pretty much identical to the original. However, there's no sound whatsoever. If you're a fan of Digger, then this is a must-play. PSP Jump, Doodle Jump. This is such a faithful recreation that it's hard to believe it isn't the real thing, even down to the incredibly unfitting, unsettling enemy sounds. PSP Legacy, Doom. Not only does this support the Doom mods, but other id Tech 1 games like Heretic. I don't know how to best explain it, but something about the way PSP Legacy presents Doom just feels wrong. Sure, it adds a lot of modern additions like mouse look and jumping, but I don't think it's inherently that. Most realistically, I think that it's the mechanics are quite different. Not enough to say that this isn't Doom, but yeah, it feels off. I guess one other thing to mention is how the music isn't included. You have to download it separately, which takes up a lot of MP3 space on your PSP. Flappy Bird. Here's a game you probably haven't heard of in a few years. Yes, Flappy Bird was put on the PSP and it's equally as frustrating as ever. It has some extra stuff like skins, if that's your thing. Very much like Cat Mario, I don't recommend you play this, but what it intended to do is done perfectly as ever, so... Geometry Wars Portable. The game itself feels identical to the original. If you enjoyed the fast-paced, chaotic, and oversaturated blast that was the classic Geometry Wars game on Xbox Live Arcade, you'll have a great time with Geometry Wars Portable. Lamecraft 2.2. If you think this looks impressive, you've seen nothing yet. Even still, this is a much later version of Lamecraft, so keep in mind it didn't always look this good. I remember the earliest days where it was really just a small, simple sandbox. It was pretty fun to make a house back then, but that's really all you could do. Now Lamecraft has far more going on, although developments have emerged past Lamecraft with releases that now simply call themselves Minecraft. No association to Mojang, at least I'm 99% sure. Minecraft. Here's one of the earliest releases demonstrating world generation in real time. Very, very impressive for the hardware. The world is quite small at any given point, generating as you progress further. Seeing the world pop up in front of you is very neat. I tried a later version where you can actually play the game. Things were looking pretty incredible until I moved forwards a few steps, turned, and then the game crashed. I tried loading it up again, figuring that was just a freak thing. I got into the game, turned my point of view, and wow, that's like a world record crash. As a last-pitch effort, I tried again to at least get into the game, then quickly turn all the settings down to their bare minimum. Specifically, the FOV is pretty noticeable here. I probably could have left that up, but I didn't, so just keep that in mind. Finally, I was able to enjoy some Minecraft. And hot dang, this is pretty much an identical port to the original game. Everything feels and plays superbly, although I can't say the complexity of Minecraft translates well to the controls of a PSP, specifically using the face buttons to look around. That, or change the face buttons to be your movement, and the analog stick to look around. This has been the case for previously mentioned and future mentions of first-person shooters on the PSP, mind you. As fantastic as this Minecraft port is, I can't say playing it on a PSP is by any means preferred, especially considering an official PS Vita port plays flawlessly. Still, it's feasible and enjoyable. It just controls clunky, and I'm not sure if there's much the developers can really do about that. Nazi Zombies Portable 2014, Call of Duty World at War Zombies mode. I can't understate how impressive this is. Off the get-go, you get a Nocturne Toten demake that is one-for-one the original's level design. In fact, just about everything here feels one-to-one, except for the graphics, which is an obvious limitation you can't get around for this hardware. Even the sound effects are the same, although I had downloaded a mod pack specifically for that. Originally, the game has its own set of sound effects to keep the copyrights at bay. I think the mod actually does add some stuttering to the game, so that's not too great. Probably weren't compressed properly. This isn't the first release of the game, there were a few before it that were far more primitive. It took a while to get to where it is in 2014, and believe it or not, the development is still ongoing. They even gave me a more recent build to play around with, which, as they've told me, under the hood has a huge list of improvements that keeps the game far more stable than ever. I didn't notice it at first, but the graphics have been improved. You're welcome. In case you're wondering what the heck this engine is, it's Quake's. This is a recurring theme for a lot of PSP first-person shooter homebrew. Quake was the most advanced tool for this kind of thing. Why bother making your own engine when a perfectly capable one is ready for use already? Especially considering the limitations of building a first-person shooter engine for the PSP. These games we'd call total conversions, because while it is based on Quake, they've essentially turned it into something completely different, indecipherable from the original source content. Anyways, as a huge fan of the Zombies game mode myself, I can say that this is a very accurate demake. Sure, the zombie reactions are a bit different and the hit detection is certainly more forgiving, but the game is, after all, still in fairly active development. I think the most astonishing property is how well the game controls. Sure, it uses the familiar PSP FPS controls, but it's so otherwise familiar to the original controls from Call of Duty. It doesn't take much to adjust to this. A very well done execution overall. Not Half-Life .01. Well, this is interesting. It's a remake of the tram ride from Half-Life 1. It's very accurate to the original in terms of how it feels and looks anyhow.
Black Mesa compound. No smoking, eating.
Reminder, no smoky okie in the Black Mesa transit system. Yeah, this has a lot of stuttering. A funny amount of it, honestly. I'm not sure what the ambition was behind creating this other than to show it can be done. The developer apparently plans to remake the first stage as well. Interesting to see how that goes down. I don't think it's appropriate to scale it since it's not so much something you'll play, more so something to see. Quake Arena Arcade. I'm not sure what this is other than some Quake 1 mod that aims to make it feel more like Quake 3.
Welcome to Quake.
Well, I can't say I've ever been this hyped for oatmeal. This is actually a fairly enjoyable way to play with bots. That said, the competition very clearly isn't using a PSP gamepad to play. You'll get dominated until you master these controls. Other than the occasional NPC getting stuck, it's pretty well designed and runs smoothly. Just maybe find a way to nerf the bots. Quartal. As the name implies, it's Portal, but in Quake. I don't even know what to say, this is just really cool. It works exactly like the original game and features some of the same test chambers too. So what if I accidentally broke the game once or twice? In all honesty, this is great, and I don't have too much wrong to say about it, other than maybe the annoying sound of the energy sphere that doesn't go away, or the sound of the button that never stops. Yeah, there's a lot of issues I had with the sound in this game, but otherwise, a faithful demake of Portal. Well done. There's the faithful ports. Now it's time for what I'll call the loosely ports. Ports that, resemble the source material, but are quite the deviation from the real thing. You'd be fooling nobody with these, but at the same time, you might find them pretty cool. Fruit Ninja. Featuring Kalimba by Mr. Scuff for some reason. You just fling your analog stick across the screen to a blue crosshair. There's only 2 frames per fruit, intact and destroyed. I mean, is the original game even that fun anymore? I guess I can give some props for simply replicating the gameplay. You died. Yes or no? That's a selection? Whenever I'm at Hell's Gate, I'll just say no and hopefully they'll give me a second chance. Half-Life for PSP. If you know about PSP Homebrew, you've probably heard about this. It seems at this point more like a running joke. It's Half-Life, but demade into the original Quake engine before they went gold source. I think the whole game is here, but it's unplayable by all means. You can use the game's console to cheat your way past certain things, but I couldn't get past the test chamber. It just bugged out on me. This features very little of the interactivity as seen in the original game. Plus it just reeks of Quake at every corner, all the way down to the player models that are constantly wibbly-wobbling about. Now there's a big blue line on my screen and I can't get rid of this. So I went up to start the rotor, but I couldn't do it because the use button didn't work. At some point I just walked up to the anti-mass spectrometer and I guess they didn't need the sample after all. Oh. Hi, Vortigaunt.
Gordon, are you not hearing me? Climb up and start the rotors, please.
I think we have more pressing matters to deal with at this moment. Besides single player, you can also give the multiplayer a go. This is a bit more competent, but you'll constantly get stuck on things, or in addition, you can't jump out of stuff. Since it's multiplayer, the console won't work anymore either. Even the botsy spawn can get stuck. I don't really see a reason to try this. Impressive, I guess, but yeah. Halo Revamped R17. Of course, this isn't actually Halo, but all things considered, it does a pretty good job representing what it wanted to for the hardware. Also, yes, it's really just Quake with a Halo shell. I have to say this is probably the best multiplayer homebrew title for the PSP. They recreated the familiar Halo multiplayer format from the gameplay mechanics to the weaponry. You can add a lot of bots for single-player carnage too, although the frame rate is less forgiving the more you abuse that. Also, at some point I seem to have gotten my character locked in this weird reloading animation. I'm not sure. There's no denying this is impressive, and unlike a lot of the PSP's impressive developments, this is actually a lot of fun, too. I strongly recommend giving this one a go. Now, for those of you unaware, this is actually based on a much earlier Halo PSP game called Jalo by JoeMart 2000 and the mechanics. I had fun playing the original release way back when, but it seems every link out there to download the original is broken. A lot of that hosting was done on Mega Upload. I'm 100% certain that this game is still on countless modded PSPs hidden away in closets across the world. It was a very popular homebrew to my recollection. Alas, every link I came across was dead, so all I have to show you here is footage from a YouTube channel called Buck Fandan. Thanks for sharing your footage with us. It was very nostalgic to see. Hopefully someone will eventually upload an archive. Jexxball. You remember the classic game of Jexxball? Well, it's back, now on PSP as Jexxball. Yeah, it does as it promised, which was to bring the familiar game to the PSP, but it feels very lazily thrown together. There's no sound, and the mechanic of creating boxes is far quicker than it's supposed to be, removing a lot of the challenge that made the original engaging. I suppose it's still moderately enjoyable. Oh. Bye, ball. Toppler. Now, this is a fairly faithful recreation of the classic tower platformer, but wow, that's one hell of a frame rate. It looks the part, plays the part. It'd be well done if only it performed a little better. So that's it. There's some great stuff, there's some okay stuff, and some poor stuff. But that's all fairly within expectation. There's definitely some good fun to be had here. So overall, I do recommend giving PSP ports a look if you actively play on the PSP console. Now we're moving on to general homebrew games, which are basically original projects designed first and foremost to be played on PSP.